Hello, Richard from budgetkeyboardist.com. I watch a lot of synth-based YouTube channels, and there's an almost religious respect for vintage synths. Now, I can't speak for other people, but like for me, my love of vintage synths comes from being young and not being able to afford any of them when they came out, combined with watching my heroes play. Tony Banks made me love the Prophet 5 and the CP80, for example. And honestly, I would love to collect vintage synths, but what I really want is the sounds that they made. You know, plugins can get you pretty close, and so I've decided personally to just focus on getting the sounds I want from plugins. So in this video, I'm going to give you 5 reasons why I choose software synths over both old and new hardware synths. So before I begin, I want to give some praise to Pro Synth Network channel as well as Starsky Cars channel, because both of these channels give plugins a fair shake, which personally I really appreciate it. I mean, let's face it, there's a lot of haters out there when it comes to software synths. I'm not going to address that here. I'll leave that for other people. Okay, let's get into the 5 reasons. Reason number 1, reliability. I saw an interview with Jem Godfrey of the band Frost, where somebody asked him, hey, do you take vintage keyboards out on the road? And his answer was no. He didn't, because it was really important for him and the band that they always deliver the best possible show to the fans, and vintage gear can be unreliable. He tours with a Jupiter X and 2 Korg Wave State keyboards. Now, if you're not familiar, the Jupiter X recreates famous rolling keyboards via basically what is like an onboard computer. Let's be honest. And the Korg Wave States contain sampled versions of Jem's keyboard collection. Practical. That sense of practicality is why I sold my Fender Rhodes years ago, before I moved from New York down to Florida. That thing weighed 120 pounds, and it was really difficult to move. And honestly, between FM and sampling, I thought I had good enough Rhodes sounds. Do I regret it? No. My Rhodes did sound great, but it took up a lot of room and it was a one-trick pony. And when I'm doing my one-man band gigs, I can't be moving a 120-pound keyboard. Back in the 80s, I gigged with a Rhodes, a Mini Moog, and an Art Pro Soloist. Now, the Mini Moog belonged to our bass player, Joel Johnson. So did the ARP. And I love that Mini Moog, but it was prone to being knocked wildly out of tune by random power fluctuations, much to the delight of our drummer. He thought it was hilarious. I did not at the time. Now I do. Anyway, I'd love to have a vintage Mini Moog right now, but I wouldn't gig with it. Reason number 2, size and weight. Okay, I already mentioned the weight of the Rhodes, but there's also how much room it takes up. I mean, as cool as it would be to have a big room full of working vintage synths, you need a big room to have a big room. And basically, what I have is what you see here, which is like half a bedroom, right? I don't have room for racks of keyboards. Plugins don't take up any real space. I mean, I can fit 2 terabytes in my pocket. Is that a terabyte in your pocket, or are you glad to see me? Reason 3, complexity. All right, think about all the audio, electrical, MIDI, USB cables you'd need for a big synth collection. Oh my. It's almost like a person sitting there, isn't it?
I am the wire person, and I make up the wires of your studio.
I don't know why the wire person has an English accent, but he apparently does. Plus all the stands. And then there's all the tricks to keeping those vintage synths up and running and tuning them, for example. I don't have to worry about any of that with plugins, which is kind of nice. Okay, reason 4, the big one, cost. And this is a no-brainer. The last synth plugin that I bought was $39. 2 plugins before that were free and free. Some of the big names in the world of plugin synths will cost a lot of money, but I mean, hey, budgetkeyboardist.com, I lean toward the plugins that are free or inexpensive or that come with Logic Pro. Okay, yes, I do own a Yamaha MX-88, but it was the least expensive 88 weighted action keyboard that had great sounds in it. It's a rompler, but I do program it. Okay, yes, I will probably break down and buy a synth with a bunch of knobs that I can play with at some point in time, but it probably won't be a vintage synth. Might be a recreation of one, though. Reason 5, flexibility. So, my old Rhodes had one patch, Rhodes. It sounded great, but it was dialed in to be more bell-like, which is what I liked at the time and not quite so honky. There's variations among the different models of Rhodes and among the different years, and unlike my old one-trick pony, I've got like 30 different Rhodes sounds at this point in time. And unlike the monophonic mini moog I used to play, the Arturia mini moog can do polyphony. If I want to play chords, I could play chords. Yes, the software version doesn't sound quite as good as the original, but I mean, size, cost, reliability, flexibility are all so much better with the software versions. The Mercury 6 software synth by Cherry Audio is one of my favorites, and it can definitely do things that the original Jupiter 6 couldn't. And since everything is in software, I can have as many of each synth as I want. So if I'm doing a gig and I want the sound of two DX7s layered, I don't need to own two DX7s. I can just put 2 copies of Dext in the main stage and I'm off and running. But let's talk about the downsides. I mean, there are downsides. Software synths aren't as inspirational to me. I mean, nothing beats having a real mini moog and turning the knobs, right? When I play with real hardware, I play differently. And it's more fun, honestly. And in most cases, the original hardware does sound better than the software. And the original hardware is certainly worth more money if you already own it. And then there's latency. Like, we can pretend there's no latency, it's not an issue, but yeah, there's latency on software synths. And while you can map controllers pretty easily, it's not the same thing, is it, as turning like the real actual knob. So at some point in time, like I mentioned earlier, I'll probably get something like a Deep Mind. I want to have an actual analog synth with real knobs, just one of them. If I were a multimillionaire, I'd have a big studio with a huge collection of vintage synths as well as new ones, and I'd hire a repair guy to keep everything running. Would I prefer that? Why, yes, I would. But I'm not rich. And for the music I make, I need access to every keyboard sound I can think of. So that might be a CP80 or a Mellotron or DX7 brass or a Prophet 5 pad or a Mini Moog bass. I want all those sounds. So I could either afford one vintage synth or simulations of every synth that I want. And they'll never go out of tune. And they won't need to be repaired when parts break. Okay, yes, you can end up with broken plugins because you updated your operating system, but you know what? You can keep old computers around. You can also buy them for next to nothing. I'm running Reason 5 on a 2008 white MacBook right now, for example. Just because an operating system update comes out doesn't mean you have to do it. This is just how I feel. I mean, different people have different priorities. I grew up playing a Poly 800 when I wanted a Prophet 5 and a DX27 when I wanted a DX7, and I couldn't afford one. So to me, having access to all the sounds I want is super important because I never had that before. I mean, why would I want to go back? And even if the vintage synths were cheap, which they're not, I wouldn't have room for them all. People like me who use plugins are sometimes made to feel less than, and I think that's silly. I mean, if Jem Godfrey can go out and gig with simulations, then so can I. And so can you. So, what are your thoughts? What did I forget to mention? Consider leaving me a comment. I mean, this channel is tiny, so I can still read every comment. And as always, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.